Call to order the meeting of the Greenwood Common Council on Monday, September the 4th. If you would stand with me and for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing after the pledge. Will be led in prayer this evening by Reverend David Mark Owens, lead chaplain at Otterbein Senior Life in Franklin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. God of all, Hurricane Dorian gave us pause and made us pay attention. We thank you for your protection of places like Bahamas and Floridas, Georgia and the Carolinas, and it was bad enough, but we had our fears it could have been much worse. So in some way extend to those folks that Greenwood, Indiana is praying about them and their concerns, and we thank you for Task Force 1 and American Red Cross and power workers that have all staged and are there to do a job. And we thank you to ask your blessings, protection upon them. But God of all, remind us that the storms of life will come, whether for our city or for us individually. Remind us to hold high and stand upon values that are solid, integrity, and corporately and individually, we must prepare and then celebrate when we weather those storms. Be with our council tonight, bless them. Be with our first responders, bless them, and remind us all of your presence in great ways. Amen.
Thank you. You may be seated. Roll call.
Armstrong.
Here.
Bates.
Present.
Campbell.
Here.
Dine.
Here.
Foster.
Here.
Gibson. Here. Hill.
Here.
Hopper.
Here.
Lexi is absent.
We have a quorum. All of you should have received copies of the minutes from our last regular meeting of August the 19th. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Foster. Have a second? Second by Mr. Dine. Any additions, deletions, or corrections? Seeing none. Roll call on the minutes.
Armstrong.
Aye.
Bates.
Aye.
Campbell.
Aye.
Dine.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
Gibson.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
And Hopper.
Aye. Minutes are approved on a vote of 8-0. This time reports, Corporation Council.
You should have received the items semi-monthly and also the litigation report on the SharePoint, and should you have any questions, please contact me.
All right, Controller.
If you could, I'd like to request to be able to walk on the budget ordinance under new business, introduction of new ordinances this evening to do the first night of budget presentations.
So moved. A motion by Mr. Bates. Have a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Foster. Any discussion on the walk on? Roll call on the walk-in on the, what was the ordinance number?
It's 1927.
1927.
Armstrong.
Aye.
Bates.
Aye.
Campbell.
Aye.
Dine.
Aye.
Excuse me. Foster.
Aye.
Gibson.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
And Hopper.
Ordinance, walk-on passes 8-0. Ordinance 1927 will be added to new business, introduction to new ordinances and resolutions. Any other committee or board reports?
Mr. President, I did file the meeting for the hotel committee with the clerk, and I believe that's available in the materials.
All right.
Mr. President, I'd like to announce that the socials project is coming along very well, and it looks like that maybe next week we will even have the building back in our hands to start moving in. And there will be a ribbon cutting on Tuesday, October the 15th at 10 a.m.
All right. October 15th.
Yes.
All right, any other committee or board reports? All right, this this time we set aside time in our agenda for the audience, and the first thing from the audience, Linda, I think you have a couple people in the audience you'd like to introduce to
I
us.
do. I would like to introduce two special people to you. This is Janet and John Phillips, and John works in the street department, and early May, they contacted me about the bicycles that are unclaimed out at the DPW building. And John being out there all the time, he would see that the bicycles just accumulate, and then they wound up going to Christie's, and we didn't always get a lot for those. So they had a brainstorm for a not-for-profit to be created and to have volunteers that would refurbish these bicycles and give them to children that they don't have some of those special things in life to enjoy. And we've been to the Board of Works, and the Board of Works has approved the city being able to give those to a not-for-profit. The name of it is going to be Petals of Joy. And we will work at refurbishing those. We're looking for the community to volunteer. If there's people out there that enjoy working on bicycles or they've got some knowledge, we would welcome them. We will welcome donations because we will have to buy some bicycle parts and also helmets for the children. We're looking for a bank that will give us a checking account with no fees attached. We've talked to the Greenwood Community School Corporation, and because of the confidence in keeping these children that would receive the bikes, keeping their identity preserved and confidential, yes. We will be sending an email to a group of counselors there at each of the schools. And we will tell them whether we have a girl's bike or a boy's bike and the size of the bike. And then they will select the person, and we will take the bicycle to the school, and the counselor then will make sure that that child gets it so that we don't have to worry about their identity being exposed. And so as the council members, if you hear something about this, you'll know what's going on.
All right, thank you, Linda, appreciate
Is
your work.
is it just through Greenwood School Court, or is that also gonna be Clark Pleasant and Center Grove? Because
We have, if they're within the city limits, I don't know, I guess that we could extend it, but,
I have a meeting next week with a lady from the Healthier Indiana, or Johnson County. She is on the board there, and they wanna get involved and create it through all of Johnson County.
Okay.
So, I'll know more after that.
just with us having 3 different school districts in the city, I just wanna make sure. it
well,
was-
we wouldn't ban anyone, but I think that we know that there is a high need at ISOM and Northeast, but I'm sure that there's other children, that are needy as well.
Are these, is there gonna be a requirement for example, free lunch, to qualify?
I think that we will leave that up to the counselors to make those decisions.
Jen and John, thank you very much, I appreciate that. And, sorry, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Linda. All right, if you're here in the audience tonight, would like to address the council concerning items of business that are on the agenda, this is a time for you to step forward to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and there is a 5-minute time limit.
Are there a couple of ordinances and resolutions that we're going to pull from the agenda tonight? Are they,
There's one we're gonna postpone and one that will be pulled, I believe, yes.
you might say that before you have everybody come up.
If anybody wants to come up.
Yeah.
If you were here tonight for ordinance or resolution 1917 or ordinance 1921, and either one of those will be discussed tonight, so just for your information. Anyone from the audience wishing to address the council at this time? Seeing none, moving on, ordinances and resolutions. First reading, ordinance 1923.
An ordinance transferring funds within the general fund for the city court from budget category 111, $11,675 to budget category 331 for public defender, sponsored by Hopper.
Do I have a motion? Motion, Mr. Hopper, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Foster. Any discussion, ordinance 1923? Seeing none, roll call, ordinance 1923, first reading.
Armstrong,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill, and Hopper.
Aye.
Ordinance 1923 passes first reading 8-0. Resolution 1917.
Dana Monson, Johnson County Development Corporation. I would respectfully like to ask that this be pulled at this time. The company notified me this afternoon that after doing some further due diligence, that they're gonna have to postpone this project, so they are not gonna be moving forward with the building.
All right, thank you. So we will withdraw resolution 1917 from the agenda, and the clerk, if you would make note of that and not put it on the agenda for the future. Thank you.
I do have a question on that. Are they proceeding with another location or not proceeding at all?
They're not proceeding at all.
All right, resolution 1918.
A resolution declaring certain personal property for tax abatement, FedEx Supply Chain Inc., sponsored by Campbell and Hopper.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Gibson, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Foster. Any discussion, resolution 1918? Seeing none, roll call, resolution 1918, first reading.
Bates,
Aye.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
and Armstrong.
Nay.
Resolution 1918 passes first reading 7-1. Second reading, ordinance 1921.
An ordinance amending Greenwood Municipal Code 1993 as amended Chapter 6, Safety Departments and Regulations to add Article 14 regarding hotels and places of public lodging, sponsored by Foster, postponed from August 19th, 2019.
Mr. Foster.
And Mr. President, as I said, the committee met, we're waiting for the fire chief to get us some information and have someone check my writing skills. I might ask him to postpone to the next meeting. We will be able to get it done by then.
All right. So we have a motion to postpone ordinance 1921 to our September 16th meeting, our next meeting.
So moved.
And I have a motion by Mr. Foster, second by Mr. Bates. Any discussion on postponement? Seeing none, roll call on postponement.
Campbell,
Aye.
Dine,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill, Hopper,
Aye.
Armstrong,
Aye.
and Bates.
Aye.
Ordinance 1921 then is postponed on a vote of 8-0 to our next meeting. Ordinance 1926.
An ordinance amending the 2019 salary ordinance, Common Council Ordinance Number 1823, to add Assistant Director position to the Parks and Recreation Department, sponsored by Gibson.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Gibson, a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Foster. Any discussion, ordinance 1926? Seeing none, roll call, ordinance 1926, second reading.
Dine,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Hopper,
Aye.
Armstrong,
Aye.
Bates,
Aye.
and Campbell.
Aye. Ordinance 1926 passes second reading 8-0. Ordinance 1922.
An ordinance amending the 2019 salary ordinance, Common Council Ordinance Number 1823, to include classifications of probation department positions, change the title and classification of principal planner, and address fire department administrative staff overtime, sponsored by Bates, Foster, and Gibson.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Gibson, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Foster. Any discussion, ordinance 1922? Seeing none, roll call, ordinance 1922, second reading.
Foster. Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Gibson.
Aye.
Hill.
Aye.
Hopper.
Aye.
Armstrong.
Aye.
Bates.
Aye.
Campbell.
Aye.
And Dunn.
Aye.
Ordinance 1922 passes second reading 8-0. Ordinance 1924.
An ordinance to establish a motor vehicle highway MVH sub-fund sponsored by Campbell.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Foster, second. Second by Mr. Hopper. Any discussion, ordinance 1924?
This is a ordinance required by the State Board of Accounts.
That is correct, I believe. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, ordinance 1924, second reading.
Gibson.
Aye.
Hill. Hopper.
Aye.
Armstrong.
Aye.
Bates.
Aye.
Campbell.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
And Foster.
Aye.
Ordinance 1924 passes second reading 8-0. Ordinance 1925.
An ordinance amending Greenwood Municipal Code 1993, Chapter 2, Article 10, to establish a general non-sufficient funds fee sponsored by Gibson.
Do I have a motion?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Gibson, second by Mr. Dine. Any discussion, ordinance 1925? Seeing none, roll call, ordinance 1925, second reading.
Hill.
Aye.
Hopper.
Aye.
Armstrong.
Aye.
Bates.
Aye.
Campbell.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
And Gibson.
Aye.
Ordinance 1925 passes second reading 8-0. Introduction of new business, introduction of new ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance 1927.
An ordinance for appropriations and tax rates for the 2020 budget year.
Try not to drag this out too long for you. I did put copies of the presentation, the PowerPoint, at everybody's spot there, as well as another packet that has just the summaries of everything. So I want to start out on that summary packet. The front page has a summary of cash flows for the 2020 budget. I've got a zoomed in version here, just focusing on what I consider our operating accounts. And what I'm really looking at here is anything that we use to pay salaries or anything that we're using for items other than capital. So that's going to be supplies, services and charges, and salaries. So any of those funds fall under what we consider operating. So when we're looking at the 2020 operating budget estimate, those are the recurring types of expenses that we have from year to year to keep the doors open, keep each department operating. When you jump a couple columns over to that 2020 capital budget estimate, capital budget is generally one-time budgets, one-time purchases. So when we're looking at the balance of our budget, we want to make sure that we're bringing in enough receipts that we cover the operating costs. And then if we have extra, we put that towards the capital. But when we have capital projects that we want to fund from our cash on hand, we can do that as well. And that's what you'll see is happening in a couple of these columns where the highlights in pink are generally where the capital projects have driven us beyond what the receipts were for that fund. But if you look with all of those funds at their cash balances, you can see that they're, in some cases, 172% of the overall budget. So they are still in great shape as far as that goes. But when you do see some of these cash flow wise in the red there, the reasoning is we have intentionally decided that we need to do something capital-wise that will eat into the cash on hand. And speaking to the MVH fund particularly, the last several years we've had money from local income tax to match our community crossings grants. This is the first year that we don't have much of that coming in. if any. So we are now using our NVH money towards that as well. So you'll see that that's showing up in the capital under NVH, where in years past we didn't have to do it from there. So that's $500,000 right there. So you'll see some of those as we go through, but I just wanted to explain what this was for you to keep in mind going forward. Zoom through this part. This is just our overview of what we're going to talk about, the process, calendar, what our priorities were going into budget season. Quick summary, go through each of the departments, just give you the highlights, and then if you have questions on anything as we go through, just stop me. So this is the overview of how the budget process works in Indiana. If we were a town, that would say town council president, but as a city, the mayor sets the priorities, and then the departments submit to myself and the deputy mayor the initial funding requests. We put together a budget, present it to the mayor. The mayor reviews it, makes any changes that he feels necessary, and then we bring it to council, which is where we are now. And council will get the budget presentations. We'll have the public hearing when we do the second reading. So that's part of the legal statutory process we must go through. And then we'll ask you to adopt the 2020 appropriations and tax rates at that public hearing, second reading meeting. So the plan here is night one tonight. The next one here in September will be night two, as well as first reading. At that time, we'll also have the salary ordinance introduced. We'll have all the work papers and backup documentation that go with the line item budgets that you've received. We'll have copies of the updated capital improvement plan that changes. Every 2 weeks we meet on that, so that one's pretty fluid. And then October 21st will look to be the second reading and adoption. 23rd is the submission deadline for Gateway, and November 1st is the budget adoption deadline. And I do leave that gap between the second September one and the October one purposefully. That gives us time to make changes that may come out of these meetings and make sure that we have everything set on the state's statutory requirements before we go to submit. So going into this process, what we were looking to do was empower our department heads through priority-based budgeting. We wanted them to go through, look at what are the things that are most needed, what does it take to fund that, and give us a list, priority-wise, of top needs versus wants. We do have that capital investment plan, capital improvement plan that I mentioned. We're trying to make sure that that's completely integrated, so the budget documents will be updating as we update that plan. We wanted to go in and increase public safety staffing levels. That was one of our goals going in. We wanted to fund additional firefighters, additional police officers, and you'll see that we were able to do that. We wanted to provide a cost of living adjustment for staff. The mayor suggested a 2% cost of living adjustment, so that's what's built into the numbers that you have. We want to leverage our fund balances incrementally and responsibly and balance operational spending with available receipts. That's what I was talking about at the beginning. Using those fund balances for the one-time capital projects, but our operating, keeping it within the receipts that we get for the year so that we know we're always covered on that. So these are the 5 priorities that we look at in the budget process. Public safety there at the top, infrastructure, that's our capital investments. Economic development goes through the RDC for the most part, so that's not really a part of this process. Quality of life, that's gonna hit both this side with parks and streets, as well as the RDC side, and then operational excellence. So that's the staff here doing what the best they can with the resources we're able to provide for them, and making sure we're maximizing those resources. So this year, the overall city's net assessed value went up to slightly under $2.5 billion. It is an increase of around 4% from last year. With that net assessed value, one thing to keep in mind as we go through is that the general fund and the parks fund are on the net assessed value of the 2.5 billion, but our fire fund is about $500 million less than that. So what we're getting there is to generate the same amount of dollars, it takes a higher rate because we do have a lower assessed value on that. And that's just because we have on the west side of the area, that's the White River Township fire. This graph just kind of shows you the historical tax rates, and you can see the last 3 years, we've really kept those pretty level. But you can see that the orange, which is fire, it is kind of growing as the piece of that bar, and that is because the city's assessed value is growing faster than the fire fund's assessed value. Our circuit breaker impact, we're estimated to be just over 1.2 million in circuit breaker losses this year. That's the tax caps that were instituted in, I think, 2010. That's pretty small for a city our size, actually. We are right around 8% of our levy lost to that. Some of the cities I worked with before I came to Greenwood were as high as 35%. So on the one hand, I hate that we're losing that much. On the other, I'm glad we're not losing much more. So this just breaks out the allocation. You see the biggest part of our budget is public safety, followed by the general government, so that's all the other operations within the government. Road and street is then the next one down, and then they continuously shrink from there. And this just shows how that's been allocated over the past several years. If you have any questions on any of the graphs, I can answer tonight, or if you want to call me, I can go through them with you too. As a year-over-year summary, this is just showing that the last several years, how much percentage-wise was each type to make it a little easier to read. Jump down to the overall highlights here. So I did talk about the cost of living increase. Full-time was 2%, and for part-time, 1% was built into the budget there. We were able to add full-time positions in several places, 6 new firefighters. So in order to do that, we offset the part-time hours that were being funded and took away that funding to push towards full-time, but then also providing the benefits that go along with it. That had to be funded. We also were able to put 4 new patrolmen into the budget, and that was actually the maximum that we were going to be able to get for this year with planned retirements. The number of FTOs, field training officers, between that and the 4 new ones will be full. That'll be all the field training people they have to work with.
So that just makes, we'll just break even then.
Well, no,
We're not really
they
adding
have,
more.
they have like,
We've added more, but they're taking place of those who are retired.
well, 4 new ones plus the ones that are retiring. So I think that we've got at least 3 for sure retirements, possible 4th. We've got 8 FTOs, so we'll have all of them busy with these positions.
Thank you.
We are adding 2 new street laborers, and then also creating an assistant street superintendent position. So that's one of the current supervisors is being pushed into that role. A lot of that is part of the long-term planning for when Kenny gets to the point he wants to retire, somebody is able to step in and take over and keep those operations moving. We did add 1 new probation position. That's a field officer, someone who will be going out and checking on those probationers rather than them coming to the courthouse. We're adding a new mowing crew in the Parks Department, which consists of a single full-timer and then 3 seasonal part-timers who work through the summer doing the mowing. And a lot of that is just the acquisition of property that the cities have. We have a lot more space that has to be mowed and taken care This is just a rundown of the full-time employee positions that we're looking to fund in this year's budget. And you can see our biggest increases there, again, police and fire, that's our goal to maximize those as we can. So within the budget, we'll have an emphasis on year-over-year comparison. Priority based, as I talked about, we want to utilize capital leases for maintaining the rotation of police car replacements. We have gotten to the point now that every 5 years we will have turned over the entire fleet. So as they get paid off in 4, by the end of 5 years, they're rolled off. We utilize capital leases to fund heavy equipment. So that is to get dump trucks and the like. A lot of those things, if we were going to pay out of cash, we have a lot going out at one time, and then we can actually invest that money and get a return on it while using the capital lease. And so some of those, it helps us to protect those cash balances by using leasing. Talked about removing the matching funds for community crossings to the MDH. And then one-time capital stuff that was on last year's will have come off. So you can see by this graph that the revenue projections exceed the operating budget estimate. And then the difference, the capital budget, is the thing that throws it slightly off of perfect balance, but that is an intentional doing on our part to actually utilize some of the cash we've saved and get some of these projects completed. So we'll try to just go through high level on each of the departments that are on tonight's schedule. We do have department heads here to answer any questions specific to their department budget. And there are summaries of the year-over-year changes as you've seen in past years. This is the agenda. You'll see it as I go through. So we'll start with the police department. We were able to add 4 new patrolman positions, increase the step pay difference between lieutenant and sergeant. That's to encourage more officers to try to advance in rank. We were able to have some savings over last year because last year we replaced bulletproof vests at $40,000. This year we're only replacing the helmets for SWAT at $4,000. So we have savings there over last year. The leases for the vehicles that I talked about are being funded through the cumulative capital funds. So you'll see those on night 2 within that budget. So really the police budget increased just very slightly with that offset, particularly from the bulletproof vests coming off this year. Any questions on police?
I think I have one question, maybe the chief could answer this. The need and the media nowadays and all the hype about body cameras, how are we in that category of having our officers have on their person body cameras?
We were one of the first agencies to go with body cameras in central Indiana. And we have entered into a lease with Axon, which is body camera taser. We're rounding out that lease this year, and then that'll be up to negotiation again. So we've been in body cameras since 2015.
Thank you.
Are there still 2 officers detailed in the task force outside the city? Okay.
One other thing I'll point out that you'll see on your line item budget is there's no longer funding under the second class patrolman. That was a recruiting tool that we're trying to utilize so that you go from probationary to first class patrolman rather than having that step in between. A lot of departments aren't doing that, so the people taking those positions can move up more quickly in other departments. This helps keep us competitive. The merit commission budget is within the general fund. We did show an increase this year in the per meeting pay of the commissioners. It's been quite a few years, I think, since most of our boards and commissions had any kind of an increase. So in discussions with Mr. Campbell and the mayor, we think that it was fair to look at trying to increase that a bit and keep up with the times.
So what is that?
So it is
Per meeting.
going to $75 per meeting.
Is that from 50 to 75?
Yes. The police pension fund, the only change really is in the calculation of the benefits to retirees. You'll notice on that cash flows that there is a negative cash flow of $7,000 some odd dollars from 2019 to 2020. The reason behind that is the way that we get reimbursed for the pension fund comes from cigarette tax money, but it runs a year behind. So the money we get in 2020 will be to pay for what we put out in 2019, which was less than what we intend to put out in 2020. However, you'll see we are estimating a cash balance over $320,000, so we know we've got it covered. The debt service funds, these are all bonds that we have outstanding. The park bond this year, $150,916. Fire bond, $157. The 2012 bond, we did roll off Series C, so what's left is the 411,719 with Series A and B. 2017 Building Corporation, that is the Justice Center remodel. The lease rental payment on that is $396,000, and then that is paid to the building corp, which then pays the bonds. The 2017 local income tax bonds, $332,419. The way that works, we get in that local income tax every month. We basically look at how much do we need to put in there to fund payments, divide it by 12, and we put that much in every month of the local income tax. So that one pretty much stays level after every payment. It goes back to zero. The 2018 Building Corporation, that is the fire station. It's coming from the CCD money. So CCD will make a payment to the Building Corporation, which then will pay those bonds. The rainy day fund, again this year we have no intention of spending that down. In fact, that is in investments right now and generating a little bit of growth, but we didn't see a reason to spend any of that down when we have cash reserves in the general fund and some of the others that we can use for projects that we think need to be done.
Question.
Yes.
The Series C of the 2012 GOs, how much was that? The original, do you remember?
It was, I don't know the principal on it. I know we were paying about $200,000 a year on it. So we cut about that much off from from 2 years ago when it
Replace it with
had
anything else?
There may be some requests coming down the pike for bonds that would eventually do that, but right now there's not anything that's really lined up for that. Most of what we're looking at is within the TIFs. This one was funded through a property tax levy, so that helps us keep the rate control.
So if we lose that principal, that goes back to the levy and somebody else is gonna take that, right?
Well, nobody can really take that levy, but it does help our circuit breaker impacts because that's gonna keep our rate a little lower against that net assessed value, so it'll help offset some of the year-to-year differences. But again, keeping in mind that if we do have something that comes up that we need to fund with bonds, that may be something that we would look at and say, well, we've had this roll off, so this would be a good justification for why we think that we should be able to issue bonds on that. So we have that option open to us if we need it. Redevelopment Commission, this is just their operating budget within the general fund. This is not anything with the TIF funds. That's whole separate thing that'll be done at the RDC meeting. Again, as we talked about, just increasing the pay for commissioners from $100 to $150 per meeting. And that did go before the RDC in July.
On the personnel services, the projected amount, is that based on 5 members?
Yes, it's 5 members, 1 meeting a month, plus we build in 2 emergency meetings into the number. The EDC, also within the general fund, does have its promotional services budget of $20,000. So we look at that as $5,000 per quarter that they are generally looking to invest in the community, and again, raising that pay for commissioners. Okay, the Greenwood Indy South Airport. I do have Rick here if there are any questions on this one. We built in the cost of living increases. We did increase the budget for purchase of bulk fuel. So you'll see that we had that increase, but we also increased the revenue expectation to offset that, because that is the fuel that we're buying and then selling to the people flying in and out of the airport. Particularly with adding the ISP hangar there, we're getting a lot more sales, so we know that we'll utilize that and get reimbursed for it and then some. We do have a planned local match for another AIP project, so that's funded mostly by the federal government, and then there's also a piece that comes from the state, and then we have to put in a piece of that. Within their capital improvement plan, in the QCAP development fund, you'll see that there is a line item regarding a proposed hangar on the north end of the current T hangars. That's all still in negotiation. This was put in just to be a placeholder until things are nailed down on that. So if that changes, I'll let you know and take that out. If we do get that solidified, then I'll let you know that it's been solidified as well. So HR, we do have funding in there for the HR director salary. There's not been any movement to fill that position, but we have the funding there if we were to need it. There's cost of living increase for staff. Also an increase for drug testing and background checks. And that's based on the number we're running annually. As we're hiring more police officers, more firefighters, and more street laborers, all of those, if you have a CDL or if you're in public safety, you are required to be drug tested randomly. So our number of tests is going up because we are getting more employees. The finance department, cost of living increase, increased training for staff. You'll see a reduction in this one. That's because in past years, the deputy controller's salary had not been shared with any other funds, so we took that and split it out of the general fund to reflect the work she does with the utilities as well. So we spread that out a little, as well as mine, adjusting the percentages. And then in the capital fund, you'll see our accounting software, the second year of that. It's being split between CCD and the utilities as far as the cost.
So the total finance budget is decreased by almost 5%?
Well, what's coming out of the general fund is decreased. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so we were able to lower that because we were able to push more costs to the utilities and some of the other funds.
But it looks good when the controller's budget goes down.
Anytime I can get it out of the general fund and get it into some user fee funded funds, it's always a good thing. So for IT, you have Rick here if you have any questions on specifics. We do have an increase on services and charges to the internet and voice over IP, that's the phone system, based on increasing rates and the number of users, as well as the copier maintenance contract that's going on. We use the capital funds for the software licensing and software maintenance, as well as the leases for desktops and for laptops. Since those do really benefit every department, it did make sense for it just to stay within the general fund. And the capital funds were a good spot to be able to do that and make some good use of those funds. The Board of Works budget, our health insurance allocation, we did update that. I put in an increase of 5% as well as an increase for the estimated addition of employees to the FTEs. It works out to just over $14,300 per full-time employee. We've got an increase in there for code enforcement. We're looking at bringing on another part-timer. It wouldn't be for the full season, but it would be either to push out the end of the code enforcement season, or somebody that would start earlier and then end prior to. So it's not a full season of that, but it would give us another employee. We put the 2% increase for cost of living on the Board of Public Works members, and then you'll see the property and liability insurance premiums were increased, and that's just based on discussions with our insurance company and where they think things are going for this year as far as increases across the board. And the final one for tonight is the legal department. Cost of living increase, obviously. This is the first year you'll see the second assistant city attorney in the budget. So since she was added in part of the way through 19, this is the first year you'll see that. So you see a big jump in salaries, but that's why, because that person is now showing in the budget. We do have funding on there for the corporation counsel position. I don't know if there's a plan to fill that right now, because what we're doing is working, but if it comes to that, we have that available to us. We did just round up the contingency for legal fees that's under general professional services, and that's mostly if something comes up that we need outside counsel, something that's beyond the ability of our folks to be able to do as well as the rest of their jobs, then this gives us that ability to find that extra. Are there any questions? See you next week.
All right, thank you. All right, miscellaneous business. If you're here in the audience tonight and would like to address the council concerning business that is not on the agenda, this is your opportunity. If you'd step to the podium, state your name and address for the record. All right, seeing none, moving on, miscellaneous business from the council.
Yes, Mr. President, I have one thing here. A constituent contacted me some weeks ago, and then being in communication with legal here, we pulled up Article 6, nuisances 17, which addresses some of the issues in community in our city, and some folks who are negligent, perhaps in some of their ways that they present their property. So I've asked the attorney if she would to send everybody else a copy of this so that you can take a look at it. I can also pinpoint, give you the address in question as well as to where the violations are being made. And then somehow I think the legal also has some suggestions for us so that perhaps we can shore some of this up and make it less advantageous for those who violate this code not to do it as often or none at all. So I appreciate that and ask for that to be done, please.
All right. Just a note for the council, I've asked, and Ms. Gibson has asked that at our next council meeting that Adam Stone, who is financial consultant for the RDC, and our controller, Mr. Greg Wright, come and present to the council some information regarding our TIF districts and how the finances are there. I know I try to send you all as much information as I can, but there's some information I think would be valuable for us. So they'll be at our next council meeting, and just want to let you know.
I had a constituent ask about drones being a nuisance, and he asked both myself and Mr. Campbell. Mr. Campbell talked to the attorney to find out what can be done about that, and we are proceeding to work on that.
The FAA just put out regulations last October, and they're revising those, and the new regulations won't be out until first of the year or so. So probably won't do anything until new regulations come out. The one thing that what I read that they did say was that all FAA regulations would supersede anything that we could do on a local level. So our hands may be tied, but we'll see what we can do.
How are they being a nuisance?
Well, the individual said that his neighbor was flying a drone over his property, and he asked the neighbor to stop, and the neighbor refused. And he said that he called the police, and the police said, well, there's nothing we can do about it because it's, and so he thought maybe we could take a look at this. So we're taking a look at it. I'm just not sure what we can do at this point, but we will take a look at it. Anything else from the council? All right, seeing none. Other miscellaneous business, Corporation Council,
None?
Controller, Mayor.
Mr. President, I just want to thank the controller and the deputy mayor for working on the budget so hard. What they haven't told you is at the same time as doing the budget, they're going through a massive software training and changeover. It's been very stressful on the entire department, and I appreciate what they've done, along with all the department heads putting this together. They've done a great job presenting the budget for you, and so I want to thank them all publicly.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The mayor allowed me, the controller, allowed me to sit in on some of the meetings with the department heads, and they really have a grasp of our complicated financial system. So I think they're doing a great job as well. All right, we are adjourned.